We all have that one franchise that we loved as a kid, but don't really care for anymore. And for a lot of us, that franchise happens to be Pokemon. There's just something about them that doesn't exude the same level of charm the earlier games did. I personally dropped off around Gen 6. It was around this time where I started feeling jaded from the series. To be fair to Pokemon, however, I thought Arceus was pretty good, and the Gen 4 remake was a great chance for me to relive some of the good old days. But honestly, Pokemon doesn't really do anything for me anymore. At the time of writing the script, the release date for the next mainline entries in the series, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, is fastly approaching. And I'm not getting it, well, at least at launch. There are so many other games I'd rather play, and that includes Sonic Frontiers. But this is a franchise I've invested a lot of time on and that I do still enjoy, and I recently got an itch to play one Pokemon game in particular. It's a game I'm already well acquainted with, but upon replaying it, I discovered something I wasn't expecting. For reasons I'll explain later, this was the game that wanted to be different before it was in fashion. Released in 2004, Pokemon Colosseum was the spin-off for the Gen 3 main titles Ruby and Sapphire. Think Pokemon Stadium for Pokemon Red and Blue. While it may serve the same role as Pokemon Stadium, Colosseum is a different beast entirely. Don't let its appearance fool you. This is a full-fledged Pokemon game, just not in the traditional sense. A lot of what we know and love is here. The turn-based battles, the Pokemon themselves, the items we're all used to, they're all here. Back then, Pokemon was still pretty simple. The most innovative stuff we had at the time were Pokemon abilities. It was simple, sure, but the whimsy of having two trained monsters battle each other was always the draw for me personally. Building this relationship with your Pokemon as you both grow over the course of your adventure, it's corny as hell, but it's an age-old trope that's very easy to pull off. That's why Pokemon has been so successful over the years, regardless of the quality of the actual product. Pokemon Colosseum has some noticeable differences right out of the gate. First of all, the battles in this game are 2v2 fights. Introduced in Gen 3, double fights were used pretty sparingly in Ruby and Sapphire, mainly as a gimmick to spice things up once in a while. But here, it's the standard, and it adds quite the unique dynamic. It's very minor, but having double battles as the format provides the opportunity to strategize and figure out which team is best against each trainer. It makes figuring out who to bring to your party that much more important. The second big difference is you don't choose your starter. Colosseum starter Pokemon is chosen for you, and you actually start out with two to fit the double battle format. And the two Pokemon you get are easily my two favorite evolutions, Umbreon and Espeon. Introduced in Gen 2, these are the dark and psychic forms of Eevee. They're usually pretty tricky to get normally, so to have access to two of the better evolutions right from the jump left a great first impression. I'll talk about my team later since I want to give them their time in the spotlight. There's a lot of other differences I'll be mentioning as I go on, but I wanted to just paint a little picture of how different things are from your typical monster catching adventure. Speaking of your typical monster catching adventure, what's a Pokemon game without its region? It's such an important factor that people lose their minds on Twitter when they learn what the next Pokemon region is. In Pokemon Colosseum, the area our trainer inhabits is the region of Ore. Bulbapedia doesn't have too much on the region itself, but you can instantly tell how diverse this region is. It has some of the most visually interesting areas in a Pokemon game. I mean, technically it's not really impressive and probably isn't the prettiest looking game, but even still, that doesn't take away from how vibrant this game is. It doesn't really feel like your typical Pokemon game, and I think that's the big draw here. The whole being a 10-year-old and adventuring the world is nice and fun and whatever, but this grittier take in some of these areas were awesome. Pyrite Town was easily my favorite place in the game. It feels like a place ripped straight out of Cowboy Bebop. Oh, and the music, my god, the music. Ugh, it's just so good! And the citizens of Pyrite Town fit the vibe so much. There are these rough and tough trainers who want to scam every trainer of any penny they can get. It really is the little things that make the experience in Colosseum. I mean, think of the first place you end up when this game actually starts. It's just a shack in the middle of the desert. It always made me wonder, why start here? Seeing as you're not playing as a 10-year-old kid and Ore isn't your typical region, the shack in the desert kind of sets the stage for the state of the world. While I didn't find a lot from my research, the general feeling I got is that Ore is a region that's on the verge of extinction. Ore isn't some bustling region with an abundance of Pokemon. It's a region where people are fighting for scraps. Sure, you have nice areas like Phoenix City with its almost Nirvana-like aesthetic, but even here people are struggling. I'm pretty sure there's a guy here who tells you to go to the shop since his family owns it. He's acting like a typical Barker would in Japan, just in the polite Pokemon way. It's very odd, and I mean that in a good way. Normally, the only reason you talk to these NPCs is to maybe go to the name raider and change your Pokemon's name, or maybe to see if you can battle someone. But here, I just felt the need to talk to everyone just to get a sense of the place. Agate Village's citizens protect the chamber of the legendary Celebi and are all calm and peaceful, but still engage in battles when appropriate. The Under is another Bebop-inspired place where the trainers here are far more aggressive, attempting to swindle anyone at any chance they can. Ore is filled with all types of weird personalities, and quite frankly, they make all these areas come alive. It's a small yet important detail that adds to what makes Colosseum such a unique experience. Beyond just the world building and the environment, what is it you do in Pokemon Colosseum? To give some context, let me explain how a traditional Pokemon game works. And I might age myself here, but just bear with me. Pre-Scarlet and Violet, the main objective in a majority of the mainline Pokemon games is to challenge the 8 gym leaders so you can challenge the Elite Four. You're also tasked with finding every Pokemon in the region to complete the Pokedex. This formula has stood the test of time, but is also one of the main reasons I've fallen off from Pokemon. They add a new gimmick to make going through the same adventure fresh, but if you've seen it once, you already know what to expect. Personally, the integration of new Pokemon and new landscapes wasn't enough to keep drawing me back in. Maybe that's why I liked Legends Arceus so much. It's totally different, and the seamlessness between exploring the world and battling provides such a satisfying gameplay loop that I really appreciated. In Colosseum, things are more standard, but like the rest of the game, is just different enough to have its own identity. Instead of gym battles with a unique gimmick to traverse your way to the gym leader, you have the Colosseums where you partake in 4 consecutive battles. That's right, just 4 battles and you win some money. That's it. I mean, yeah, sure, nothing amazing. If anything, it's a stripped down gym challenge. But the scale of the Colosseums, the swinging camera as you approach the next challenge, just the entire package just sets the stage for this grand spectacle. None of these are any sort of challenge, but just the vibe of being in this arena sets the stakes and motivates the player to see the challenge through to the end. But what's coolest about these is that these Colosseums are not integral to the main plot of the story at all, so if you don't want to play them, you don't have to. Kind of. I want to talk about the story separately, but just for reference, I got pretty deep into the game before I realized I hadn't even attempted some of the Colosseums. The Colosseum in Pyrite Town is the only mandatory one in the game for story reasons, and so the devs made sure you got at least a little bit of the Colosseum experience. Now, you don't have to go through all the Colosseums, but it is in your best interest to go through them all. You're going to need to be very prepared going into some of the late game battles. I mean, Pokemon battles are pretty simple in concept. Use Pokemon that your opponent's Pokemon are weak to, and use the appropriate moves to defeat them. I'm not going to get into the intricacies of EV training or any of that stuff. I'm not playing Pokemon for those reasons, and I'm sure a lot of you watching aren't either. There's a lot of better places to learn about those things, as well as Pokemon natures and blah, blah, blah. My point is, for the first time I felt like I was genuinely challenged by a Pokemon game. This is no Persona game. On its surface, Pokemon is very easy to figure out, but with the double battles and the pretty insane level scaling here, Colosseum presents quite the challenge. I can probably count on my hands how many Pokemon battles I've lost over the years when playing through the game normally, and let me tell ya, a few of those times were in this game. I'd get pretty frustrated in the moment, but it allowed me the chance to rethink my strategy, which of my Pokemon to start in the battle, when I should switch them out, etc. I never feel the need in other games to strategize which Pokemon I should send out. Normally, I would just send out the one best suited for the battle. Here, I had to carefully consider what duo I would send out, which Pokemon I'd need to carry me in a tight spot, and even a Pokemon to use when I needed to catch another Pokemon. These are things I never felt the need to consider in the other games, and it's an experience I vastly prefer. It's nothing too difficult, but making sure your Pokemon fit a specific role in your team is essential to succeeding in this game. This is why I say the Colosseums are kind of mandatory. If you take some of these trainers lightly, they will steamroll you. So the Colosseums at the very least offer a great place to grind. You get lots of experience and you get a decent chunk of change to buy the items you'll need for the harder battles in the game. It's cool that you can skip them if you want, but I don't really see any way you'll be able to fully beat the game without some sort of grinding. And as much as I like them being optional, I think the Colosseums also happen to be the game's biggest problem. If you were to just look at this case at, say, Toys R Us back in 2004, you'd imagine that it'd be similar to Pokemon Stadium. Colosseum seems like a logical step up from Stadium. You see the legendaries from the main game of the generation and everything. Look at the back, and you don't really see much of what the game has to offer. It's not until you start the game where you realize it's not anything like Pokemon Stadium. For me, this is great, but if you wanted this to be a companion for your Ruby or Sapphire save, it won't work the same way. First off, you need to beat the entire game at least once to even unlock the feature. Just as an FYI, I couldn't confirm this since I don't have the GBA adapter for the GameCube. Genius Sonority was in charge of this one, and it's very apparent they wanted this to be a standalone adventure. Speaking of said adventure, I think it's time we chat about Pokemon Colosseum's story, because unlike most Pokemon games, this one actually has a story. Well, if that doesn't get you hyped, I don't know what will. There were explosions, doesn't look like we're playing as a kid, and it looks like we're stealing something? Absolutely insane. Our trainer ends up at the shack in the desert I mentioned earlier and see these two shady guys leave the diner. After a Pokemon battle, we make our way to Phoenix City and run into the two thugs from earlier. After defeating one of the traders in battle, they abandon the vehicle they've been traveling on, along with the cargo in the trunk. Upon inspection, the sack is actually holding a young girl captive. The girl seems to have lost her memory, so this is your opportunity to give her a name. I'm like 93% sure her canonical name is Rui, but I named her Futaba because, well, yeah. So Futaba has amnesia and immediately decides that it's probably best to stick around with us for the time being while she regains her memories. She will constantly follow you as you explore the world, but she does serve a very specific purpose later on. Futaba tells us to go see the mayor to let him know about the plot she was stolen for. Before we enter the building, an obvious Sephiroth reject steps out and notices that we're a Pokemon trainer. This guy, his name is Nascor by the way, tells us he likes to look in our eyes and that we'll be seeing him soon. Okay, whatever. When we speak to the mayor, Futaba explains that she was taken by those guys because she has the ability to see shadow Pokemon. A shadow Pokemon is a Pokemon which gives off a black aura that has its heart sealed off, which turns them into pure fighting machines, even attacking trainers on occasion. Once the mayor hears this, he tells us that he's going to open an investigation into the shadow Pokemon and the people responsible, before telling us to go check out Phoenix City's Colosseum? Huh. That's odd. Futaba explained pretty clearly that these shadow Pokemon attack people, and he seems to kind of just shrug it off? Well, I'm sure that means nothing. When we head to the Colosseum, we're met by Team Snag'em, the Team Rocket equivalent, and we learn the backstory of our character. Instead of playing as a 10-year-old child looking to become the Pokemon Master, you're playing as a former member of Team Snag'em. Team Snag'em's hook is similar to all the other teams in the franchise. We want to steal Pokemon for X reason, but it's very interesting playing from the perspective of someone who left one of these gangs. Now, Team Snag'em is still pure evil, so we don't get to see them in any sort of sympathetic manner, but still, I think it offers quite the change of pace, adding a different feel to the context of the adventure. I've mentioned this a few times already, but Or is a region that is devoid of Pokemon. When you look at a typical mainline entry, you'll know that the status quo is that Pokemon live in tandem with people, whether that be as trainers, breeders, or just as common household pets. Pokemon work hand in hand with people to thrive in society. That standard is lost in Or. Pokemon, in their entirety, are almost to the point of extinction, so Team Snag'em attempting to steal as many as they can add real weight to your encounters with them. For the first time, instead of just being part of the world, the gang presents a real threat from start to finish. Playing as one of the people who used to not only be a part of the gang, but actually revered as one of the team's best snaggers was something I was very interested in. Being someone who's wanted to see some of these Nintendo franchises take a darker tone, this was right up my alley. It also makes sense of the first cutscene. Had no idea why we were getting armor as a kid. Getting back on track, after defeating the trainers and learning about our hero, we hear that the mayor's house has been invaded by the two thugs we fought earlier. Futaba suggests we go and find some Pokeballs because she knows what it is the thugs that kidnapped her are doing. The only place in Or that has any Pokeballs happens to be the shack in the middle of the desert. When we arrive at the mayor's place, we run into Man, say what you will at how over the top and corny this is, this leaves an impact. This dude's a walking meme and I wouldn't have it any other way. You battle the trainer you didn't face last time and things go differently this time around. When he throws out his Pokemon, something unexpected happens. That's right. Shadow Pokemon aren't just a story detail to incentivize you to play through the adventure. You need to save these Pokemon from the abuse they've been suffering under their current trainers. It changes the dynamic completely from your typical monster catching adventure. You know how it is. Find a Pokemon in the wild, bring its health down, throw a Pokeball. In Colosseum, with catching being involved directly in the trainer battles, it changes the entire dynamic of a battle and how you construct your team. While a decent amount of the Shadow Pokemon are scripted, most of them can appear as you're just battling trainers. I can imagine a lot of people missing the entire trainer circle in Pyrite Town, missing out on at least 7 Shadow Pokemon. Beyond that, it's pretty much the same old thing. Attack the Pokemon to a certain degree, snag them. The animation looks super cool, mimicking a hand snagging the Pokemon into the ball. From the perspective of the story and tone, this fits right in with the Ore region. Pokemon are nearly extinct, so if you want to grow your team, you'll have to steal them from other trainers. Sure, our character is a good guy now, but it seems like he's still got some team snag'em in him. But from a mechanical standpoint, Shadow Pokemon are a mixed bag. While it functionally works the same, the manner of which you conduct battles completely changes. I was using a guide and knew which teams were coming with each trainer, but with no knowledge of the order of which they'd come, it became quite tedious and frustrating. Colosseum, as I've been stressing this entire video, is no cakewalk. It's possible for your entire strategy to be thrown out the window in the first turn, assuming your 2 front Pokemon don't match up with your opponents. And if the opposite trainer starts with a Shadow Pokemon, forget about it. Colosseum does a great job of letting you adapt on the fly like normal Pokemon, but damn, I haven't had to think this much in a Pokemon game for a long time. And while it does function normally, catching some of these Pokemon presented quite the challenge. I'm not even talking about the legendaries available in this game, which happen to be the legendary dogs from Gen 2, my personal favorite trio of legendaries of that variety. Nah, just the standard Pokemon just would not stay in the ball. I'm sure this is typical Pokemon practice, but you're best applying a status effect to the Shadow Pokemon you're trying to get before starting the catching process. But even then, it's no guarantee. The Pokemon are just very stubborn, fitting the fighting machine background they have. The big issue is that Shadow Pokemon always come with a move that I swear is the bane of my existence. That move being Shadow Rush. From an offensive perspective, this move is actually really good. It doesn't have a typing, and while it doesn't one-shot all the Pokemon, it does a great job of just stacking damage. But from a defensive or catching perspective, this move blows! Every time a Shadow Pokemon uses Shadow Rush, they take recoil damage. So if you've worked insanely hard to make sure you haven't killed the Pokemon you want to catch but enough to make catching it easier and it uses Shadow Rush, then oops, sorry, guess you're out of luck. Luckily, I was very aware of this going into the game, so I was very save conscious, and all it would take is a quick restart and I would eventually catch the Pokemon I wanted. But damn man, if it wasn't frustrating as all hell sometimes. I did manage to snag all 48 Shadow Pokemon, and including my 2 starters, brought the grand total to 50 Pokemon. That's not a whole lot when compared to the mainline stuff, and I vastly preferred this. I've never been a guy to finish the Pokedex unless it was absolutely necessary, and the further the series goes, the more that becomes the standard. Maybe that's why I don't like Pokemon that much. While it did present quite the challenge and even tested my patience a bit, catching all the Shadow Pokemon wasn't anything I couldn't handle. I probably won't be doing this again for a good long while, but it wasn't so bad to the point where I'll never play Colosseum again. And since I mentioned the Shadow Pokemon, I might as well mention purifying them. By using your caught Shadow Pokemon in combat, they won't gain experience points, but instead trip off their Shadow meter. So the more you use your Pokemon, the more pure their heart becomes, and eventually to the point where you can fully purify them. Head to the Celebi worshipping area in Agate Village when your Pokemon is ready to be purified, and It's a pretty long process to go through, and while there are items to speed up the process, you can rarely, if ever, afford them unless you do an obscene amount of grinding. Off the top of my head while typing the script, I want to say I put in at least 20 hours into the game, which, considering the scope, is a pretty long time. If I wanted to go through the process of purifying every last Pokemon, you probably wouldn't hear from me for a good long while. So I only purified a few of the Pokemon in the game, those being the ones I wanted my team to consist of. Some I got by complete luck just by carrying them in my party, which was pretty good for specific battles. And since I forgot to mention it when I actually talked about the battle music, oh man. There's a few different renditions, but they are all some of my favorite songs in Pokemon. They definitely aren't as iconic compared to the main stuff, but damn, these are all bangers. It does a really good job fitting the Colosseum aesthetic with some really hype beats. Ah, so good. Sorry about the odd placing for the music section. I didn't find a natural place to put it, and I didn't want to forget about it. If you've made it this far, you'll notice that things are pretty standard and by the books, just with a few tweaks. The battles are here, just with a unique twist. Catching Pokemon is here, just with a unique twist. And gyms are here, just with a unique twist. Now that I've talked about legitimately everything in this game I want to talk about, I think it's time we finish off the story and get out of here. Spoilers if you actually care. I'm going to be skipping around quite a bit because there's some stuff that doesn't really matter. So after our first encounter with Shadow Pokemon, we make our way to Pyrite Town to eventually find the dude with the afro from before, Mirror B. You do have some activities like meeting the Colosseum leader who's absolutely useless as a trainer and as a man quite frankly, as well as being introduced to the Children's Network. But your main objective is fighting through Mirror B's thugs and challenging the man himself. Pyrite Colosseum is one of the few mandatory Colosseums you have to go through for story purposes. After making your way through Pyrite Cave, you eventually find Mirror B. His team consisted mainly of Ludicolo, and his shadow Pokemon was a Sudowoodo. After defeating Mirror B, he just kinda walks out and escapes, and the chief comes and thanks you, even giving you another Pokemon for your journey, that being Plusle. That does technically bring the total to 51, but the in-game counter only numbers the shadow Pokemon, and you get 2 starters. Plus, I put my Plusle in the daycare and never took it out. It's probably level 100 by this point. I don't know. Now here's the point of the video where I'm going to be skipping some things. That's because for the most part, you're going to be doing the same thing, and really, it's not all too interesting. Now, I don't want to completely tear into the narrative of Colosseum because I think it's probably one of the better Pokemon stories. It's not as interesting as, say, the Gen 5 titles, but it's probably the most invested you'll be in a Pokemon game in my opinion. But you don't really learn anything new until the very end. The main thing you'll be learning is the nature of shadow Pokemon and how they actually function. However, the game kinda just does that on its own anyways. Just as an example, you'll go through this entire dungeon to fight this Cypher general. Oh yeah, the whole gang is called Cypher by the way. Anyways, you'll go through this entire dungeon to fight this Cypher general and your reward is just a file to tell you how Hyper Mode works. Even though by this point I've already figured out Hyper Mode, its advantages and disadvantages, and pretty much everything else by the time I got here. Sure, your real reward is the legendary you get when fighting them, but they aren't all mentioned in the story. Jumping ahead a bit again, the final boss uses a Tyranitar as his signature shadow Pokemon. Sure, Tyranitar is super strong, but really? No legendary? Hell, the boss legendaries of this generation, Kyogre and Groudon, don't even show up in this game. This cover art is a lie! The battles are all pretty tough for sure, but narratively, this just feels like filler. It doesn't hurt that the general Cowboy Bebop-esque vibe is pretty much the entire game, but the middle third of this game, wow is it a slog. The only highlight is catching the legendary dogs because damn, that'll never not be cool. So for the sake of the pacing in this video, and because I don't really want to talk about it, let's jump ahead to the good stuff. Eventually, after causing Cypher enough trouble, you get told that one of the reoccurring NPCs in the game went to Realgam Tower to investigate undercover. He was pretty prominent earlier in the game, showcasing how absolutely useless he is. So with little hope, we make our way to Realgam Tower to check things out. Man, Realgam Tower, wow. Just the sense of scale as you take each elevator. Seeing as this is the game's final area narratively speaking, it offers this bombastic, grandiose setting that perfectly encapsulates what Colosseum is all about. Sure, Ore is a dead region, but if anything, these people are trying to go out in style. If you played like I did, then you already knew the scope the Colosseum's added when tackling them. Even if the crowds are just low-res PNGs running at half the frame rate, the sheer amount of them surrounding you just makes the battle feel more epic. Real Game Tower takes that philosophy and dials it up to 11, offering by far the best Colosseum experience. It's in Real Game Tower where you face the Cypher Generals once again, letting you know that the real challenge is yet to come. After fighting your way through the tower, catching any shadow Pokemon on your way, you eventually come toe-to-toe with Gonzap, the leader of Team Snag'em. While I feel the encounter lacks the emotional peaks I would have liked, I do enjoy this battle. Gonzap actually acknowledges how much trouble you've caused Cypher, and actually asks you to rejoin the team so you can use your prolific snagging talents to his advantage. But of course, we've turned over a new leaf, and we dispatch of him just like the rest. I always like to headcanon that Gonzap kinda gives you his seal of approval after you beat him. He steps aside and warns you of the challenge to come, but I always told myself that Gonzap was acknowledging our strength. Our character's origins, even with what we get in the story, is pretty unknown. We know he's definitely older than your typical Pokemon protagonist, and we know he was a part of Team Snag'em at some point, but what we don't know is how long he was in Team Snag'em, how old he was when he joined the team, and all that stuff. I think it's fine to leave this to interpretation because I always imagined this dark and gritty tale of how your character kinda just ended up on Team Snag'em. Remember that one scene from My Hero Academia where All For One tells Tomura Shigaraki that he's here for him? I imagined something like that for our character, but it's not really dived into all that much. Gonzap definitely doesn't act or give off any sort of All For One vibe, but hey, I have a wild imagination. After defeating Gonzap, you take the elevator to the top of the tower where you get your final Colosseum challenge. Nascor tells you that it's time for us to pay for all the trouble we've caused. After defeating the Colosseum challenge, mind you with no healing in between battles, we finally challenge Nascor himself. He doesn't pose too much of a challenge, but this battle has to be my absolute favorite in the game. I took some time to mention the battle music, but what I love about this battle is that there's no music whatsoever. It's the peak of Colosseum battling, regardless of the challenge. I found a strategy that worked pretty easily, but like everyone else, he has a shadow Pokemon too, so I had to accommodate for that. And call me basic, but I think Nascor just looks cool as hell. Once you defeat Nascor, you'd think the game would end, but the mayor of all people shows up. You know, I did mention it was weird that he didn't take the shadow Pokemon seriously, but no way he's actually the final boss, so wait, he is, never mind. The mayor reveals himself to be the head of Cypher, Eviche. Besides the fact that I probably pronounced his name wrong, Eviche's fight is kind of just whatever. It's kind of tough, but I just can't get over how this guy didn't get a legendary. How do the 3 weenie baby generals get legendaries, but the plot twist final boss gets a Pokemon any trainer could get? I actually really like Tyranitar. He's one of my favorite Pokemon, so I was happy to snag him, but the lack of a legendary here kind of just takes away his final boss status for me. After defeating Eviche, he tries to make his escape, but Ho-Oh shows up destroying his means of escape, allowing the authorities to take Eviche into custody. See right there, a legendary he could have had that would have been really cool to try and catch, but nothing. The credits roll, but if you're familiar with Pokemon, you know that there's always some sort of postgame to go through. Normally it's get the national dex, find more Pokemon, and that's about it. But here in Colosseum, you get access to a lot more. This is mainly used as cleanup for the last shadow Pokemon, but there are a few final tales to be told here. After the credits roll, you're spawned right back to the shack in the desert. In terms of new areas, we get to see the hideout of Team Snag'em. You know, the same place we blew up at the beginning of the game. You have some pretty interesting battles, including a rematch with Gonzap as you try to stop Team Snag'em from developing any more snag machines. It's a pretty lacking finale as we tie the Team Snag'em story up, but it's better than nothing. Gives a good chance for our character to put that life behind him as he continues on a different path. After this though, you get the real meat of the post-game. Once you finish the Snag'em story, you'll learn that there's one more Colosseum being run. After meeting a few prerequisites, you find that the Under houses 2 Colosseums. The normal one you need to take the elevator forward to access, and the other you take down into the depths of the Under. This Colosseum is organized by someone who calls themselves the Deep King. Pretty fitting since this Colosseum is called the Deep Colosseum. You gotta go through this gauntlet 4 times, and then a 5th time to challenge the Deep King himself. Funnily enough, catching his Shadow Shuckle was very easy to grab. While there's nothing really going on in terms of a story, the extra double battles were a lot of fun to go through. I was pretty underleveled for all these fights, and I was still able to get through all of them. I was like maybe 10 levels away from the strongest Pokemon in the post game, and I was still able to beat it on my first try. Not bad if I do say so myself. And we're still not done! After defeating the D-King, you get an email from some of the citizens of Ore harassing us for supposedly attacking them. After a few people let us know we attacked them, we get an email from the leader of the Children's Network telling us to watch TV ASAP. When we do, we hear the report of us apparently going on a rampage with a Shadow Togetic. We find our doppelganger in the desert, and to restore our reputation, defeat him in battle, snagging the last of the Shadow Pokemon in tow. After defeating our doppelganger, they reveal themselves to be a Cypher remnant who claims to be the Master of Disguise. However, I took this ending a bit differently. Now, if you've watched my videos, you'll know I hate the "how I could have turned out" character, because most of the time, there's no information that could prove that it would be the case. Look at Deku and Shigaraki in My Hero Season 5. They have this entire arc dedicated to fleshing out Shigaraki, something that is very redundant, and go as far as to give Shigaraki similar mannerisms to Deku. The big smile, the semi-wide eyes, I've seen this before. But with the doppelganger, I saw it in the same way, but it doesn't bother me the way it normally does. Seeing as I had to come up with a lot of the canon for myself, I took this as just a brief moment where our hero almost looked at a reflection of himself. If he had stayed in Team Snag'em, he could have very well become this person. Sure, I came up with this by myself, and it's for my personal enjoyment, but hell, in that context, it's a very nice way to cap off the game. And of course, the moment you've all been waiting for, my team. First, we have our starters, Aaron Yeager and Satoru Gojo. Gojo was my heavy hitter, and Aaron was my go-to when I needed to snag a Pokemon. My first purified Pokemon I got was Bakugo, a fitting name for Typhlosion's explosive tendencies. And then of course, we have our legendary dogs, Rengoku, Giyu, and Zenitsu. Rengoku was clearly the backbone out of these three, whilst the other two were used for more situational encounters. They proved to be a great team, not really doing a great job of type spreading, but a great group all around. And that's it for Pokemon Colosseum. Pokemon is a franchise I'm very disconnected with. I'm done being a 10-year-old kid whose goal is to complete the Pokedex. Sure, the new game has other things, but that's still a huge aspect of the game. There's just other stuff I'd rather play now. Once upon a time, Pokemon used to be my entire life. I'd get all the games pretty close to their launch dates and put hundreds, if not thousands of hours into them. But as I've gotten older, I found that Pokemon doesn't really interest me at all anymore. Legends Arceus was a nice change of pace, and I may continue to get those, but the mainline stuff I'll probably be avoiding unless I'm really bored. Strictly speaking on Colosseum, however, I had a really good time. Recently, I've been wanting to go back to some games I grew up with, and Pokemon Colosseum was one I was excited to jump back in. I got the more mature game I wanted. I got a bit more challenge than I was expecting, and I got to explore by far the most interesting region in Pokemon in my opinion. It feels like the developers watched a ton of anime before starting the concept of this game, and what we got was a result of that. It has all the Pokemon stuff you would normally expect, sure, but its presentation, art direction, mechanics all give off this rougher than usual Pokemon vibe. There's nothing like it. Even its sequel, which I don't even know if I'm going to talk about on this channel. If I can take away anything from this experience, I can say that there is still a place for this kind of Pokemon game to exist alongside the mainline stuff. I've grown up with Pokemon, but Pokemon hasn't grown up with me. And maybe that's why I appreciate Colosseum so much. It dared to be different, and in turn, snagged me along the way.